And the soap opera that is Tesla continues this morning. Elon Musk announcing on Twitter he's working with Goldman Sachs and buyout firm Silver Lake on his plan to take Tesla private. Musk says, quote, "I'm excited to work with Silver Lake and Goldman Sachs as financial advisors, plus Wachtell Lipton, Rosen and Katz, and Munger, Tolles and Olson as legal advisors on that proposal to take Tesla private." Sources tell Reuters that Silver Lake hasn't been hired in an official capacity and is not currently discussing taking part in a potential deal as an investor. Mind you, by the way, just a quick note, Silver Lake, of course, worked with Dell on its take private and has worked on many take privates. This seems to be in an advisory capacity, which is something that historically they have not done. Earlier Monday, Musk wrote a blog post about how a take private deal could work. He said that the head of Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund voiced support for the proposal several times, including as recently as 2 weeks ago, but talks are still ongoing and the fund and with the fund and other investors. Of course, that's leading to all sorts of questions. Shares of Tesla off about 6% in the past week and up slightly in early trading. The New York Times reporting this morning, and I can say that several of the sources I spoke to yesterday would suggest that Saudi Arabia, while in talks to some degree, has not committed to do this. Anyone who was intending to do this or was committed in a sort of financing secure kind of way would have had a term sheet or some kind of documentation or some kind of at least effort to step forward in that way. That has not happened. Another major stumbling block, which we have not really discussed, is the idea of CFIUS. If they're going to own more than 4.9% of Tesla, all of a sudden this becomes a question of national security.
The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which lately makes a lot of news because of China, but they could make news.
But they would have to look at this. By the way, similarly, people have talked about, would SoftBank step in to this? There is no evidence from my reporting that SoftBank is interested. But
that was the first question people asked. This has got to be SoftBank.
But to the degree that if you believe that SoftBank were coming, all of a sudden you would also have a CFIUS review. In fact, in virtually every instance, unless you can find an American investor to do this, you would have a CFIUS review. And then the last piece, by the way, is there are different triggers within the SEC about number of owners, right, physical number of owners that require disclosure. And so there is a question about how many owners they can ultimately have under this scenario and how that works. And then the last piece to throw at you, as so many of the bankers in New York have been working on this idea that investors are going to roll their shares into this could work in the context of a retail investor, could work in the context of an actively managed investment fund in certain cases. And by the way, there are provisions in certain of those mutual funds that don't allow this kind of thing. But most importantly, index funds cannot just roll their funds into. It's not like Larry Fink can go, we're just going to roll your 401k into this thing, because that's not how this works. So there's a lot more stumbling blocks than I think people necessarily appreciate.
I have one basic question.
Yes.
Is it true that the managing director of PIF, the Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia, sat with Elon Musk on more than one occasion and said, let's take this company private? I think that is a very interesting question. Would you have to have a term sheet? Blah, blah, blah. Yes, all of those things are true. But is that a core truth? Is that for real?
It would not surprise me. It would not surprise me in the least. And actually, I can suggest that the reporting that there have been meetings is accurate. The question is sort of the formality or informality of that conversation. If I said, "Hey, Michelle, one day it would be really great if you ever want to take your company private. If you ever want to take your company private, Michelle, call me. I'd love to work with you on that. That could be a great thing for us to do."
I mean, it sounds Elon Musk suggests it was their idea. They came to him and said twice, "Let's do it."
But I guess what I'm suggesting is I could even see that, even them say, "Hey, we're looking to diversify. If you ever would think about it, we want to figure out how to. We have a lot of money to spend. We have this vision plan. We're trying to get away from oil. What you're doing is very interesting." That part does not shock me. Having said that, this idea that anything that you'd ever walk out of a meeting like that with some certainty. By the way, and this is probably an unfair generalization, but given the travels that you've had in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia specifically, the idea that people float stuff and then don't actually commit. I've been in situations, unfortunately, where people have actually made commitments in Saudi Arabia and then seem to find a way out of them very quickly.
There's a committee structure over there that gets a little complicated.
But that's my point. To put it mildly. Terms. But that's the point. That's ultimately the point.
Yeah.
So a lot more questions than answers this morning, but continues.